discussion. I want to make sure everybody understands that clearly. The word discussion means that you guys get to ask questions. I hope you spend some time to think about what you might want to ask. We have some very great panelists here. I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of this event before we get into those introductions. We do a lot of vendor-based presentations, lunch and learns, come and learn how to use this product, come and learn about this vendor. This event very specifically was made as a vendor-neutral, vendor-agnostic, simply to be able to get together as security professionals, because we find, from our perspective, we sit down a lot with a lot of the companies here and other companies that ask the same questions over and over again. A lot of times the question is, what do you see happening in the industry? What are these sort of companies doing? What are, where are their security going? Where is it headed? So we thought maybe what we ought to do is get together as security professionals in the industry and have some of the captains of the industry with us as well to be able to grill them a little bit, ask them what they're doing. We have representations from different types of companies, different interests here, as well as in the audience as well. So I want you to feel free to ask questions when the time comes if we need to. I think the room's small enough we don't need to pass the mic around. The only thing I'd ask is if you're going to ask a question, if it's the first question you've asked, please introduce yourself, your name and the company that you're with, so that we can kind of get an idea of maybe who the best panelist would be to answer that question for you. Unless you're going to direct the question directly to the panelist, you can do that too. Also, I think Jan probably asked you when you came in, part of the other issue is we're going to have a good discussions going on here with a lot of questions. We'd like to be able to follow up, have you guys follow up with each other kind of as a peer group. So if you don't want your email address shared with other people in this room, let her know and she'll take you off. Otherwise, when we send out the survey of how the thing went, we're going to attach the email addresses and the names and the companies so that if you guys hear an interesting question from one person and you want to follow up with that person, you'll hear their name and you'll know their company and you'll have their contact information as well. So just let Jan know if you don't want to be on that list. It's an opt-out, I guess, in that particular situation. In addition, we're going to be doing other vendor-neutral events like this. We've done some in the past that worked really well. If you're interested, or if you know anybody in your organization is interested, our next one coming up, probably in Q1, is going to be storage related. We're not going to have sponsors, HP, EMC, NetApp, they're not invited. We're just going to have conversations about where your storage is going, what your challenges are, where the industry is going, how to look at storage properly. There's been a lot of interest in the SSD flash arenas and things. A lot of people maybe heading that direction when their infrastructure won't handle it, and just to be able to have those sort of architectural discussions without worrying about whether a vendor's going to jump down your throat. So be on the lookout for that invitation if you like this format as well. Before I forget, we're going to be, if you haven't already, the servers are going to be coming around and getting your orders. If they haven't tracked one down, we're going to try to do this as best we can. As a grand thank you for the panelists, they don't get to eat till later. So we're going to try to do this where you guys can have your food and they'll be serving it and you can eat as we go along with the questions. So I'm not going to tell you to be quiet because there's no way of doing that, but if you can just make sure that as you're eating, we have respect for those asking questions and receiving the answers. Okay. Is there anybody that hasn't been to Ruth's Chris here before? Okay, just so you know, the restrooms are behind the wine racks back there. They are hidden. It's nice, aesthetic, pleasing, but you wander around a lot if you don't know where they are. So if you need to use the restrooms, feel free to step out through the back there and work your way behind the wine racks on the other side of the room. Okay, also we're going to introduce the panelists here to give you a little bit of understanding of the talents and where they came from. We've tried to get a cross-section from different areas. You'll see as they come along, I'm reading them in the order I've got them written down here, so they're not in the order that they're up here, but start off with Eric Stevens. Eric right here, raise your hand, Eric. I tried to put the signs back behind so you have some sort of visualization what the order is. Eric is the Information Security and Strategy Officer from the Office of the CISO. Did I say that correct? Okay. Recently, through the WebSense acquisition by Vista Capital, Eric Stevens leads the Office of the CISO team of experts organized particularly by WebSense that counsels other security professionals on best practices to prevent advanced attacks on data theft. He brings over 15 years of information technology and security compliance experience to the role with experience in the design, implementation, and management of data loss prevention programs. Mr. Stevens comes from BEW Global, Inc., where he focused on the deep technical inspection of business processes and designed highly customized DLP policies for organizations of all sizes. His responsibilities involved successfully addressing the highly complex multinational privacy, regulatory compliance, and intellectual property needs of his clients. Mr. Stevens later served as the principal solutions advisor for the company, explaining and promoting holistic and data-centric security programs, program designs to clients around the world. Mr. Stevens holds a Master of Science degree in cybersecurity and 2 cybersecurity-related graduate certificates from the University of Maryland, University College. Did I say that right? Okay. All right, close enough. Jim King. Raise your hand. Jim King's on the end there. Jim's Senior VP of Technical Support and Infrastructure for Master Control. Mr. King has more than 18 years of experience in technology, software development, and staff management. During that time, Mr. King has held numerous leadership roles in technology management and has assembled an extensive track record of building successful technology and support teams in the life sciences, retail, and service provider fields. Mr. King's hands-on management style, combined with his deep knowledge of technology, software development, infrastructure, project management, information security, and operations, has been recognized for achieving goal-driven results in generating revenue, improving, recruiting, developing talent, managing expenses, and building customer and partner vendor relations. Prior to joining Master Control, Mr. King served as CIO, CTO of Nextstock, and as CTO of Nelson Laboratories. He's a founding member of the Information Systems Security Association, the ISSA Utah chapter, a longstanding member of InfraGard, and is a member of the Association of Information Management, AIM. Mr. King speaks nationally and internationally on IT strategy and security topics. Mr. King has earned a certificate in criminology from the University of Utah and a bachelor's in business administration with a specialization in IT management from the American Military University. He's a graduate of the FBI Citizens Academy. All right, Mr. Carl West. Mr. West is the Chief Information Security Officer and Assistant Vice President of Information Systems for Intermountain Healthcare, an integrated delivery network based in Salt Lake City, Utah. As Intermountain's CISO, Mr. West is responsible for information access, authorization, privacy, business continuity, and data governance. Mr. West leads the planning, development, and implementation of Intermountain Information Systems security programs to promote information system reliability and accessibility while protecting and defending against unauthorized access to patient information, clinical systems, network, and data. He reviews and studies all information published by DHHS, HCFA, and other regulatory bodies relative to health information security and privacy. As CISO, Mr. West helps establish the written policies and procedures associated with the release and maintenance of health information. Carl has been involved with information technology for the past 25 years. Prior to Intermountain Healthcare, Mr. West was VP of Managing Partner in AT&T Consulting Services. Mr. West was also has a keen interest in development of new technologies to improve patient care and lower patient costs. Mr. West is a member of the Utah Health Information Network Privacy Security Board, as well as a board member of Weber State Computer Sciences Department. Mr. West received a BSCS from Brigham Young University and also received an MBA. Mr. Leon Trappett, right here on the end. Mr. Leon Trappett is the Information Technology Security Officer for Bank of Utah. Mr. Trappett has been with the bank for more than 5 years. During that time, he's been instrumental in maturing the IT security program. Mr. Trappett understands and monitors risk at a very technical level and communicates that risk to the board. He deals with security cases interacting directly with the bank customers who have experienced compromise of their customer information and or with law enforcement as they investigate the incident. Mr. Trappett participates in various committees where he helps monitor and enhance the security programs related to the process and controls. Did I say that fast enough? Holy cow, I didn't think I was going to need a drink. Okay, a couple of governance issues before we get in. We'll get right into the questions. As I mentioned, we want to make sure that you guys have opportunities to ask the questions. To keep it as vendor neutral as possible, we're certainly not trying to obfuscate anything. If you bring up a vendor name, that's totally acceptable. If you're using something, you have questions about it. If it gets into a feature comparison or competitive analysis, we'll probably just cut you off and say, hey, let's talk about that later, sort of situation. Let's talk mostly at a higher issue than the solutions we've chosen to solve problems. In addition, I'm going to try to allocate sufficient time. I know we've had some submittals of a number of questions. I probably have 30 or 40 questions here that were submitted by other people. If we get into one question, we're drilling down and kind of just gnawing it to the bone. I may tie that one off and say, hey, let's follow up with that one as a group a little bit later. So please don't take offense if I kind of shut a line of questions down just to get to some of the other ones that we have here. All right. Having said that, I think I might have talked enough. All right. Do we want to start off? First of all, is everybody ordered? Okay, maybe I should have back. Is anybody not ordered? Okay. All right, good enough. Also, if you can maybe mute your cell phones or something, that would help too. All right. Anybody want to lead off with the questions? I got a whole list. Yes. Your name, please?
Yes, my name is Adam Steed. I'm with W.J. Bradley. I'm a mortgage company. I would love to get your guys' opinion. I've seen a 180-degree shift in a lot of organizations' methodology and their perception of using software as a service and putting customer data into the cloud. It used to be in the past, a lot of organizations were, we're not going to put any of our customer data into the cloud at all. We're going to leave it all on all of our gear. I've seen a recent trend of organizations saying, hey, if there's a data breach, the best thing that we can do to show to our investors is that we're nimble, we're fast, we were quickly able to resolve that issue. And the fastest way to do that is to just switch vendors. So if I use software as a service provider, it gives me allows me to be nimble to show if I do have a compromise to my investors that I can quickly change, I can quickly go under a third-party audit and then go on our way. Any feelings on that?
So I'll take first crack. Go ahead. So first of all, I'm responsible for cloud infrastructure for Master Control, so I have some perspective on this, not only as a customer, but as somebody who's responsible for managing all of that infrastructure. I've got both my own on-premise data centers as well as I use AWS. And I can tell you that having been in an FDA-regulated space now for almost 10 years, had you asked me this question on whether or not regulated companies, FDA specifically, would have been in the cloud 2-3 years ago, I would have said, no way. No way. FDA would have not allowed that loss of control of data and or content or IP or exposed to the potential risk. But I can tell you here in the last 2 to 3 years, I've seen a wholesale shift. I see pharmaceutical companies now saying, hey, do you have a cloud offering? We don't want to invest the CapEx anymore. But are you PCI? Are you compliant? Can we audit your data center? And sometimes I can say yes for my on-premise. Sometimes I say, oh no, I can't send you my AWS location because it's in Ireland. So I've seen a wholesale shift as well. It's all about governance and does that cloud provider, whether it's private cloud or a public cloud, do they provide the proper governance around what your expectation is, your level of risk tolerance? That's been my experience, at least in the last 2 to 3 years.
One of the things that I've seen, being in a lot of companies throughout the last 3 years, is sometimes the risk decision in and of itself is why they've moved to the cloud. Because some companies would rather put that risk on somebody else. As long as they do their due diligence to say, do they have an SSA 16? Are they ISO compliant? If they meet their checkbox for compliance, some companies in a lot of those spaces are saying, let's just move the data out. That way, if there is a breach, it's not our fault, and we can point to all the due diligence that we had. That I think is kind of a gamble, definitely. I have some customers in like pharmaceutical spaces that would never put their data in, and others that are rushing to it. So it really comes down, I think, to risk tolerance. One thing that I have seen, and I think it's a little bit troubling though, from cloud providers in the last year, one of the things that when I would do a cloud offering or secure a cloud service, I always made sure in the contract that I had the right to audit that company. What I'm seeing more and more of is the attorneys not allowing those in the cloud providers. They're really pushing it back and saying, you just need to accept our assurances, our certifications, et cetera, and go with that. So I really think it does go back to risk tolerance to your individual organization. And again, sometimes that risk can push the data right out. PCI is a big one. We're seeing a lot of tokenization where you're subscribing to that cloud service and you never have the credit card numbers just sitting up in the cloud. So again, I think it definitely goes down to your individual risk tolerance for the company.
Great question.
Well, so let me just add one more thing.
Sure.
Also, if you're regulated or if you have a low tolerance for risk, what you're deciding to go to the cloud, definitely audit the provider and make sure that you do establish whether or not you can have an SLA or a recurring audit structure where you can go and re-audit that environment. Too many cloud providers out there that claim they're cloud or cloudy, right? And they're running a rack of servers out of their basement and there's really no governance. Mom and pop running around plugging stuff in. You want to make sure you audit. have your own governance controls and requirements in place before you go down that path.
But, you know, the security vendors are starting to get savvy to this, and they're starting to create virtual machines that you can at times put up in some clouds, so that you can have a lot of the same assurances you have locally up in the cloud. So we are seeing the cloud providers, initially they would just say no, wholesale, but we are seeing them playing more with the large security vendors to allow that.
Move on, but I got to tell you, I've got a question that came in that I'm very excited to ask, so I'm going to jump in with one of these questions, if that's all right with you guys. All right, this one's a big one. You guys ready for this? In 2005, Gartner estimated the total IT security spend to be at $7.4 billion. They estimate that number to be $80 billion in 2015. But in 2005, there were relatively very few reports of large-scale computer security breaches. In 2014, it seems to be a daily news report, yet we're spending 10 times the amount of money on security increase over the last decade. There seems to be an explosion of large-scale breaches, like the Target, the Home Depot, the Jimmy John's, Apple, all of these sort of things. Here's the question: what are we missing? I mean, we're spending 10 times what we spent a decade ago. What are we missing?
Education. What happened? I mean, it's education. It's educating your employees on don't click that phishing email link, right? Don't pick up that thumb drive or that DVD off the ground and install it in your computer. I mean, I think that's a big portion of it. That most of it is it's social, right? You get an email, you think, oh great, I'm going to get $5 million from Abdul in Nigeria because I'm good buddies with the Marine General. I'm willing to be all about this. Click. Now you've got to compromise.
I think the other thing that I notice is the maturity of the bad actors that are out there. When you talk about a 2005 time frame, the malware, the viruses, the things that were out there were things that were an annoyance, but they didn't have malicious payloads, and they didn't have the ability to get into the payroll into other systems. And so the bad actors have matured, and their maturity level is significantly different. The flip side of that is all of that creates opportunities for us with budgets, and so that 10x increase has come along with our ability to go back and do better watching for those folks.
I think it also comes back to combining the social engineering aspect of testing with penetration testing. If you bring in a vendor that demonstrates to your employees how a phishing email, just by clicking an attachment, can infect a computer, and then from that computer you can privilege escalate or move laterally throughout the network, I think that component's missing for most companies. Is we're missing that testing.
The social engineering side.
The social engineering.
You know, something else that happened in 2005 was really the SOX hitting all of us. And we look at the escalation of spend. I think it really started on the security side with SOX being implemented. And I don't like to really talk about it in terms of the spend on security, because I honestly don't believe that that money's spent on security. It's spent on compliance, and it's spent on point solutions to meet compliance checkboxes more often than security as a foundation to your business and the trust in the data that you have inside of your environment. So I think we could probably, in the end, and you know, my company is a vendor, I mean, I'm sure we would love to hear you say this, but I think in the end we could all spend a lot less money on security if we actually thought about it from a foundational part of our business as a business enabler. And we baked security into every project that we did, and we started with security first as opposed to just trying to comply to this and to that. We have seen a lot of money. I mean, I've worked for partners that represented multiple vendors, and I see all the time where people would come in and say, oh, I'm just here to check a box. I don't really have any other use for this. So I think a lot of the security solutions have even gotten bad raps out there because they're improperly implemented for the wrong reasons.
Thank you. Can you guys hear? I think she adjusted the microphones. Can you guys still hear in the back?
Yeah.
You okay? All right. Next question. I got a bunch of them. You guys want to have one? Anybody wants to jump in? All right. So along those lines, so this may be actually a corollary to that question then. Everyone here, I think, would agree that if we wanted to, we could spend our entire revenue stream on security products. Our budgets could be bottomless if we wanted to buy everything that's out there and protect from everything out there. Given that situation, given the nature of the social engineering and the desire that we have to not check a box, how do you then go into your limited budgets and say, I could spend 500 times this, but this is what I've got, and so this is how I'm going to prioritize it? What are the drivers behind it, saying this much money is going to go to prevention, social engineering, this much money is going to go to governance or compliance, this much, what are the drivers, and how do you make those decisions?
I think there really need to be business drivers in those cases to really get the funding that you need for the critical areas and work through, we know what we need to do from a security, and it may not be a social commentary, I don't know. But to go through and actually look at what our business needs are, what our business risks are, and how we're going to prioritize the spend on security there. And then I think from our nuanced piece from the CISO roles is how can we line that out to a long-term security program so that we're not just, again, giving point solutions. So how do we map that back into something that's going to do more for us, that spend does more for us than just solve one problem. I think we really have to get the business involved. We have to make them understand what we're doing for them and how we continue to make their life easier. And that, I think, will help us to secure more budget. Sometimes I've worked with actually pulling budget from other areas so that we can then make them responsible essentially for the security requirements that they are introducing into our environment.
So my comment would be, try to understand the threat vectors. Where your likely source of attack going to come from? I can tell you that I spent 2 years at a West Coast retailer, and their primary threat vector was their IT staff, internal IT staff. They had zero discipline. They were probably the most damaging, had the most damaging potential to the information security protocol for that company. That was where I started, is to cordon off the IT staff from being the risk to the organization. So understanding what the risk is, I can tell you my current environment, we're all mobile devices. And so that's my critical threat vector, it's mobile devices. Employees nowadays, they want to be able to use their MacBook. If you're a Windows shop, they're going to do whatever they can to bring their MacBook, right? And so trying to protect that inner soft portion of your infrastructure. So for me, I just look at where the most likely threat vector is based on how the organization functions.
At Intermountain, Brian, we've looked at it a little bit differently. What we have tried to do is take all of business risk and put it into one pot. We then have categorized that. We have 16 categories, and all risk comes in. 16 different vice presidents sit, and we categorize the risk. Then we classify the risk. Then we go through and look at data that's associated with the risk. Then every risk gets prioritized, and we have 5 categories that we look at, from financial to clinical impact to patient impact to the reputational harm. We categorize all of them, score them. In the end, all risks in 16 categories have a matrix and a score, 1 to 5. We get reviewed by that upper body of vice presidents. Based on that, we then have a heat matrix that tells us where are the higher and the lower risks in the company. That then translates into dollars and budgets and projects. And so we do that fairly systematically, a methodology that's pretty organized in Intermountain at this point. And in the end then, I'm able to get budget and dollars, not based on Target happening or Jimmy John's, but based on what we have identified with the company, our real risk, persistent threat across the organization. And it includes everything from security risk to operational risk to the business. All of those areas are considered in that same categorization classification of risk.
I think also with identifying the risks, you need to pay attention to the gaps in technology that exist. You may have data loss prevention, you may have a firewall antivirus, but you may not be monitoring at the file level, the file access.
All right, thank you. Any questions yet from the crowd? John?
Use open source. How do you deal with things like Heartbeat, like Bash, Shell Shock?
Can I repeat that for you? Sure. So John's asking if they use a lot of open source technologies, and if so, how do you handle the open source sort of vulnerabilities, the heartbeats?
It's almost like a guarantee to infiltrate
Yeah.
Maybe what they don't.
How long's Bash been?
To answer the question on how long the one bash vulnerability was there, they identified it existing 12 years ago.
It became 10 2 weeks ago.
So I'll take a crack.
Do you
I mean,
use open source?
So we use minimal open source. We actually use some open source in how we deploy our software in the cloud. We had no impact with Heartbleed internally from an internal operations perspective. We don't do anything open source based. As a regulated company, we have to take serious consideration of what we bring in on premise and run. So right now we're, my organization is predominantly Microsoft stack, so I'm more concerned about what's going on with Microsoft than with open source. I mean, for me, we had some DNS servers that were compromised with this latest round and some MacBooks, but minimal exposure. There's no possible way to avoid any of these scenarios, right? I mean, you're going to run somebody else's software, you're going to run software, you're always going to be looking for a vulnerability, slows things out.
From Intermountain's perspective, I think this is a lot like the question that was asked earlier about do we use open cloud. And in the cloud environment, we really have to be in that environment today. There's too much that's there. Open source is similar. We try, like the cloud, to stay away from it. We're very much in the cloud now as well. We have a lot of open source. There are too many clinical applications that are specific to the podiatry, to the phlebotomy, to some specific area of oncology where I have to take an application that fits the physician's needs the best. So we do use open source. We actually have some processes to try to mitigate risk. So we have a security architecture team that takes a look at every product that comes in. It is policy. We categorize the risk. We have a documented form. It isn't subjective. It's a fairly objective tool that ranks and risks everything that's associated with that open source or other product or project. And then we try to figure out not how do we prevent it from coming in, but how do we mitigate the risk associated with open source, Heartbleeds, things like that. And so yes, we had a large list of systems. I won't mention how many hundreds or thousands it was, but with a hospital-based system, we don't have a few hundred applications. We actually have thousands of applications. So we have a lot of risk associated both with Bash and Heartbleed, and we have a threat detection and response team that quickly identified and an architecture team that put strategies to say, here's how we mitigate over what period of time. We first look to say, what is externally facing, that's the greatest risk, and what's internally. And so we had a different scale and a plan associated with the system, the number of users, internal versus external access, and it was fairly structured within hours of receiving those threats.
I would say in the past company, I had the opportunity to be one of the people sitting at Intermountain being drilled by about 35 individuals on that architecture, and they are very thorough. It is a very organized, thorough process. So I think if more companies were taking that kind of approach as they brought software in and really getting into how these things work. I just left a healthcare system in Colorado, in Chicago yesterday, and they were in a position of having a lot of vulnerabilities, Bash vulnerabilities. They really got hit hard with Heartbleed because of the nature of the applications that they were running inside of their business. And there's only so much that people can do to mitigate that threat, but it is always refreshing and sometimes a little nagging to run into the companies that really do pay attention. But again, their system is very well documented as well. For our sake, and again, with actually having products in the market space, we do a lot of internal review of our own. We have our own security researchers. Obviously, we're tracking, because of all the cloud, what's going on in real time with about 9 billion users, worldwide. So we do see a lot of things very quickly. But then something comes along like Bash that is very much and kind of out of left field for a lot of these researchers. We do a lot to try to reach out to the research communities, the white hat community, to try to keep a good forward flow of information from them, just to help protect ourselves and the offerings that we have, obviously. But from our internal security perspective, we do a very robust job of vulnerability management On some of the product issues that we run into, and this we see a lot in the healthcare industry as well, we have grown obviously by acquisition. So we had products like Surf Control that we acquired way back in the day in Port Authority. So when we bring those products in, it is a matter of, you know, at what point are we going to go through and do that full code review of every single piece of every single subsystem in those systems to find out what those look like. So luckily, that's a big thing inside of our company that we look at inside of our software. Like for instance, on the Bash, we've got our labs blog on that's being updated daily with everything that we find. So it's, you know, a challenge. You know, obviously most people find that there are pieces of their code that are open source, even whenever they didn't realize it. It wasn't the original design docs, but somebody in their infinite wisdom when coding something decided, oh, I can just use this, you know, method or whatever, because why would I want to reinvent the wheel? I can just pull this down. And the risk that it reduces is actually quite substantial sometimes.
So just out of curiosity, were you able to turn off CGI scripting, or did you patch it? How did you address shell shock?
Initially we had some intrusion prevention rules that went in place, and then a vendor released some patches for a system that we were using on our perimeter.
Did you turn on access to that?
We mitigated it through our intrusion prevention system.
And in our case, it turned out that we weren't using the vulnerable version of that bin. So thus far, we're in a pretty good position. I haven't read the blog today to see if it's been updated. But on the on-prem products at least, I think we're in a really good position. So that was a bullet dodge, really. I don't think it was by design, by some kind of prescient, you know, forethought, but very good. That and a lot of our products are on Windows, so that has helped us.
I think another important thing is to do your own vulnerability scanning with. There's a variety of them. We use Tenable Nessus in-house. And not just scan it once and call it good for the next 2 weeks. Scan it more than one time because the signature will change.
And one thing when I'm actually going out, we do our internal scans, external parties that do our external scans as well. I always just try to make sure that I'm varying the tools that I use. I want to know exactly what my vendor is going to use so that I'm not relying on the same thing. Like say, if I'm using Qualys for something, I want to make sure that they're using something else. And that, one, I'm actually having researchers look at it and not having just everything being machine done.
Thanks. Okay, we got a question in the back there. Name, please.
Jim Ferry, Skin. Maybe I should tell you where I'm from. What is a good? This stuff's great. It's probably a little bit over, my head. I'm trying to talk the business into, building a good security group, and they go, "Oh, what do you need? Like an intern from BYU? What do you need a chief security officer for? What is that? What does a well-functioning and minimalist security group look like? Is it like I hear, IHC, I don't know if Mark Brooks is still there. I've known him for 45, 50 years.
He's still there.
He has a lot of money. He's got a lot of my money, public money. He can spend, hire 80 people, and no one's watching him. But I gotta, justify, I can't hire a whole architecture team, a whole intrusion protection team. So is there like some minimal thing for us that aren't as educated, like 3 people or 5 people, or at least identifying one?
I could tell you a different way to approach it, and it's what we've done at Intermountain, and that is look at the risks, and then base what you do on the risk. And after you look at the risk, look at some sources like a Gartner or something like that, and see for your industry, what are they recommending? And I'll tell you that even though Mark is able to do some great things and get money, we always operate, if you look at Gartner's model for security, we operate well under that. And I always reflect that back to the audit committee of the board, to the management committee, that we are not overspending. And in fact, for size and complexity, we should probably be far above an industry average, but we are not. We're well below that.
You're very mature, you would be more mature than anybody in my entire organization. I mean, we don't even have how do you get even the expert to be mature enough to do that type of?
I think a lot of companies are not, they want to hire people that know it. They're looking for the golden goose and get them for a good price. I think a lot of companies still are not willing to train people. One of the biggest one of the huge, I think, gaps inside of security groups are people with investigations backgrounds. I'm a former police officer. My undergrad is in criminal justice. But when I was with a partner and we were doing managed services, we always really sought out people with investigations background, loss prevention, data loss prevention, former private investigators, et cetera. Looking for those forensic type people that have that way of thinking. All too often, I think we just try to pick somebody internally that maybe is interested in it. So I think you have a small department, you have mental health security. I mean, I've been in a position where I had 13,000 plus users in 27 countries, and we were a 2-person security shop. Now, it was a lot to keep up. I'm running 23 projects a year. But we both had similar backgrounds. We both had IT auditing backgrounds. So I think it's just trying to find those right people to find a team that thinks skeptically about what they're looking at, and that have that kind of investigative spirit, and try to look at things the way that the hackers might. If I'm looking at the system, if I'm evaluating it, how would I get into it? So I think that.
How about getting along with others? Because we went to one security guy, and he was an ex-military security guy, and he'd written all the books on security, and he was a genius, but he had a little bit of a problem.
So I take the approach you said, go down to BYU, get that intern. I did that 5 years ago. Got an intern from their master's program. They have an excellent program. Got an intern, had him come and do a risk assessment. That's where you should start. Don't build a program. Go get an intern, do a risk assessment, identify what are the risks, what are the threats. Get that person to prioritize them for you. And then based on that, decide, do I need 1, 2, 5, 6 people? And I did that 5 years ago with that program. I'm very familiar. I actually speak to them once or twice a year now because we like their assessment and what they did. So they did a good job.
Thank you.
So I would agree. I mean, so we did this last year as well. We hired a couple of interns out of BYU to help us do some penetration scanning, some application scanning, some vulnerability assessment. It worked out very well. I would say the worst thing you can do is to spread FUD through your organization and try to make fear the reason we're going to build an information security program. It's the fastest way to failure. The risk assessment is the first step. Get with the business, let them understand the risk of not having a program in place. It's not really about the bodies, how many people you throw into the team. It's really about having very good people who have either a forensics background or simply are really big geeks that want to look under the hood and see how it works. Those are usually the best folks in my mind.
The United States government has a program called the U.S. Cyber Challenge, where the last 5 years, students have come together and competed in a national scale and done a cyber camps. You can actually engage with them, and they will let you know of people in your area that have gone through that vetting and have gone through the cyber challenges.
Thank you.
I was going to mention something that I did years ago to get started was to hire a security consulting firm.
Oh, yeah.
So that they could make a security plan. And then from there, develop it. Once you had a security plan, then you could figure out who could come in and implement it, what you needed.
When
You don't know what you don't know, and that's the biggest problem.
And really, whenever I think if you're in a situation where you need somebody to come in from the outside, and it's amazing how companies, executives even, all the way looking at the C levels, will not take your word for it as the person that they hired to tell you the answer, and are more than willing to throw down 50 grand to hire some people they don't know to come in and give their opinion of your situation. So sometimes, though, being that person that comes in and helps, you can really, kind of stage things with them a little bit and make them understand the grenades that they need to throw themselves on, the landmines they might need to step on or dance around. But sometimes it does take that outsider to come in and say the really hard things, the very politically unpopular things, to your organization to get them to kind of start towing line and understanding their role in your security program, how they daily add to your security woes and vulnerabilities, so that you can get that buy-in from them at that point so that they do understand what they have to do. And that's where I think it is valuable to spend that kind of money. If you're in a position where you can hire somebody locally to come in as a local person or going through university, I think that is a great cost-effective thing. Sometimes it just takes some big-name company to come in and tell you that you're doing it all wrong and to get them to really comply.
Thank you guys super duper much. I mean, it's awesome with council.
Can we have a quick survey of people in this room that have more than 3 dedicated information security folks?
Okay, just repeat the question. If you have 3 or more than 3? If you have 3 or more employees that are dedicated to information security, raise your hand.
And see, that's part of the problem.
Okay?
We have all these tools, they're almost all noisy. Like, we don't have people to actually look at those tools on a regular basis, or we're not staffing to what we're doing that. We're creating these honey pots of risk, essentially. Because as soon as something happens, everybody's gonna point to you and say, we should have known this. You know, why did we know this? And in cases like data loss prevention systems, you may be creating a honey pot there for somebody to attack. Because you should have known that you had this data sitting out there and you didn't do anything about it. It can add risk. I mean, your security program itself can add risk to your environment.
So at the risk of boiling this down to a bumper sticker, you know, I mean, is it fair to say, because I engage in these conversations, anytime you come as an IT administrator, security administrator, and you go to management and you say, this is what I found and this is what I want to do, you've drawn a line in the sand that all they can do is argue with it. If you come back and you say, this is what I've done to define all of our risks, what do you want to do about it? And you put the power in their hands, then they can come back and say, well, this is what we want to do about it. And they could come back and say nothing. But at least you've defined the risk and said, I'm telling you what the exposure is to the company. How do you want to manage your risk?
And I think the thing too, to your
Do it
question
right.
earlier about
Just
what
get it
should
right.
you do?
Get it right.
If you look at what happened up at the state a few years ago, right after that happened, they got a lot of money. They had PwC out there for a year or more with a large team. So your companies are willing to pay the money if the risk presents. I know that on the day that issue occurred a few years ago up at the state, I got a call from our CEO saying, tell me about our plans associated with this same risk. And I said, that's the one you remember, Charles, that you told me to delay. And that was actually the next day approved for get it done by end of October.
Yes.
So I think those things are made available when the crisis is seen and when it's visible.
And I think you have to figure out a way to take advantage of those crises when they come up without just spreading FUD through the organization. You know, we need to very pointedly come in and explain how that relates to our risk and give that visibility to that problem, you know, some use to our security program.
So I'll just make one final comment. I mean, having been on both sides, having been on the technology side, trying to make enough noise to justify hiring a team, what I've learned over the years is that when you start talking about hiring, all the C-levels here is ka-ching, you know, how much money is this going to cost me and what's the ROI? So you need to go into this thinking from the business case, risk avoidance, and how staffing a program up like this, where's the return on investment? What is the risk that we're going to mitigate by building this team or process? And what's the framework? Come prepared to talk about the framework you're going to establish first, because a lot of the C-level executives that I work with, they understand the regulatory framework, right? So if you're talking about ISO 27001, that might resonate with them. They're like, oh, I'm going to build a program around that.
Great question. Thank you. Next question? All right. I got a million of them. Okay. Okay, let's see if I can frame this properly, because it's actually kind of 2 questions. How do you prioritize your security concerns with relation to internal threats versus external threats? We talked a little bit about this. I want to put it in perspective here, because threats don't always present themselves immediately. One particular concern everybody's heard about if you were in the airport last Friday. Anybody miss a plane last Friday besides me? Okay. Just not to belabor the point, but if you haven't been watching the news at all, a disgruntled employee decided he was upset about being transferred to Hawaii. Poor little guy.
In the winter in Chicago.
Yeah, in the winter in Chicago, he didn't want to be transferred to Hawaii. So we know right there was some mental problems. But beyond that, he decided to cut transmission lines in a maintenance shed and catch things on fire, including himself. Now, granted, there was a lot to do with, there really has a lot to do with backups and redundancy and all that kind of stuff, because they're estimating it's gonna take 2 weeks to get back to normal. I'm sorry, guys, we're not buying basins at Home Depot. But the problem is that you've got to understand that the security threats can present themselves through the internals as much as externals. We spend a lot of money on buying products and buying things to help stop automated attacks, and to Jim's point, there's a lot of education, but we still have to have internal controls. What, if anything, are we doing to help, or where do we care more? Do we care more about external? Do we care more about internal? If we care about internal, what are we doing to help mitigate internal risk?
So for me, and my primary focus is internal. Every organization I've been in, it's the soft chewy center that's been the bigger risk. It's introduction of mobile devices, smartphones, iPads, personally owned devices. Employees are smart, right? People are just intuitively smart. They're going to bring in their personally owned iPad or their MacBook. They're going to know how to get on the wireless network. That device may or may not have malware on it. It's education, mostly, not exclusively. I know my buddy from WebSense was probably going to contradict me here, but it used to be you'd worry about the outer edge, the perimeter of your network, and what might make in. I'm more worried about what my employees might bring in, and how do I segregate critical systems from maybe not so critical employees. How do I mitigate my risk from stuff that's going to be introduced from the outside world, personally on devices more specifically. So my primary focus really is on the internal side, trying to assess risk internally, just because people are human and they're going to do some stupid stuff, whether they intend to or not.
I actually spend most of my time, when I think about that, preaching that exact message, that due diligence, unfortunately, has meant securing the perimeter for way too long. And we have to think about what our perimeters really are now. Sometimes the perimeter is that mobile device. Sometimes it is the data itself sitting in a database. And there are a lot of programmatic reasons to start drilling that protection down into your environment. Obviously, we have constant barraging of threats from external, but when you do have that internal threat, they can cost you a lot of money. They can embarrass you to death. They can take down, our very robust radar systems. So we really have to think about the internal, because when we start thinking about securing the internal data, and I had this argument the very first time whenever PCI came out, there was a lot of focus on the network layer of protection for PCI. There was a lot of encrypted transmission, etc. But what there was no discussion about at all is securing the applications that were actually handling these cards. Everybody was just thinking about transmission. And it drives back to that when we talk about applications. We have to start thinking about security in those applications and what's really going to be needed, not just so that it doesn't get stolen, but so that we can assure ourselves, our business, and Wall Street that the data is actually correct. So I really think driving in and taking that look and saying, let's look at our internal processes. I think SOX helped. It's one of the things SOX did help with. They really drilled home role-based access controls, especially in financial systems. And that is a really good start to ensuring that we're doing things well. But we have to start looking at how we're going to protect the data internally from systems that could corrupt it, from users who may misuse it or may try to exfiltrate that.
So I'm going to make one final comment on this, and it's going to be controversial. I know I'm still taking a lot of flack from a blog article I wrote about 2 months ago, where I made this comment. First of all, computer is like core IT, right? I mean, that's you're either responsible for or you're in that role. So I'm going to tell you that my perspective is, from where I focus my emphasis starting with the IT staff. And I did an audit for another local bank organization here a few years ago, and my specific emphasis was to audit the InfoSec team. And predominantly because these guys have the access, right? They've got the access, and in most cases, they believe that they're infallible. I'm never going to get malware on my computer, right? But they've got access to all the firewalls. They've got access to the whole network. Those are the folks that I start with first. Do we segment those people? Are we doing the right thing? Are they using antivirus? Are they doing the right things? Are they following the actual controls that they're helping to write? That's usually where I start. So I take caution with the internal IT staff first, and then I start to fan out my perimeter from there.
Thanks.
Oh, and developers, and I've got one of my developers right here. Some of the most dangerous people on the planet.
Sorry, there was a hand back in the back. Darren.
Darren Regis, Alsco. I work for a linen company, very low tech. operations, so education is one of the topics that is kind of in front of us. I wonder if you could comment on just what successes you've had or what strategies you've seen pay off as we look at things like, you know, securing the human. Do we find some outsourced material, do something internal? What has been effective in your experience to help end users gain that education?
So end user education or internal IT operations?
End users.
End user education.
User education is the cheapest part of your security plan. It doesn't cost you usually anything. Just making them aware, starting a, when I was at $1.50 years ago in internal audit, we started a blog thing that we sent out and emailed to everybody weekly. Just some things to think about. And making your users think about just a degree of skepticism whenever they do things. That healthcare space that I was in Chicago yesterday, that I mentioned, they had been breached like 12 times by people actually sending them fake phishing emails to get their PeopleSoft credentials so that they could then divert their paychecks somewhere else. The last round they got, a huge number of employees, paychecks diverted. They have every technology control you can think of. They have wonderful processes in place. But again, they have not done the internal education for people to make them actually stop and think, is this the right thing for me to do? And again, the users are going to find a way. So they get the email, they have, like I said, they have web gateways, they have DLP, they have everything. But on their cell phones, though, they're actually getting these emails and they're circumventing all these controls because they don't have a provision in place to reverse proxy all their cell phones back in, so they're going through a web gateway. So now these users are hitting these sites and divulging this information. And that was just the latest one. But I told them, I said, guys, you don't need to spend any more money on stuff. You don't need to buy any more equipment. No matter what Cisco tells you or WebSense tells you or whoever, you need to train your employees. You need to make them think, is this the right thing to do? Am I adding risk by doing this? And I just don't know how to make that any more plain to most companies. It is a simple thing to do, but we have to, at some point, make them understand that they have a stake in the game. They have a stake in the game of keeping their job, or or for protecting the income of the IP of the company.
So I'll give an example. So first of all, I've been with Master Control about 2 years, and one of the first things I noticed was that there was not the level of control that was in place was not to my liking. I'll just leave it at that. What I wanted to do was to test the vulnerability of my employee base, which includes a U.S. operation, a Japan operation, at the time a South Korean operation, and an office in the UK. I wanted to test our vulnerability to phishing exploits, more specifically spear phishing. We brought in 2 interns from BYU. I told them, without any visibility to how our operation is laid out from a technology perspective, hack my mail server, and here's the email I want you to craft. And I wrote this email in my best American Nigerian English. I used foreign time date stamps. I mean, I tried to make it as obvious as possible. I sent this email in August of last year. It's been a little over a year now. And merit increase for Master Control occurs in January, right? So there were a lot of red flags in this email. There was a link, a URL in the email. Essentially, the email said, congratulations to you, it is merit increase time. We would like to enroll you in your merit increase benefits. Click this link. And it looked like a legitimate email from inside Master Control.
It's the exact email that they passed on this company.
Let me tell you, we went. Now, fortunately, the link, I didn't know where the link to redirect it to, but it should have been obvious. And the thing that became clear is that people don't look at the mouse over on the link, right? Otherwise, they would have seen that it didn't say mastercontrol.com, it said utahbruteforce.com, which is my website. It happened to be actually one of my PoE cameras, the URL to log into one of my cameras at home over the internet. So we sent out the email. Next thing I know, I get a text from my management system at home. So I've got a pretty extensive network at home. They crashed my camera. They crashed my camera. So I get a reboot, crashes again. Anyway, it's crashing all day long. And then I thought, okay, the storm's over. I'm going to send an email to the company that says this was just a test. I wanted to see how vulnerable we were. I forgot. Japan comes online. Camera crashes again. UK office comes online. Camera crash. I mean, so for 2 days straight, my cameras are crashing. Now, all I was harvesting in my syslog was really IP addresses. I wanted to see how much traffic. But I can tell you, I sent the email out and said this was a phishing test. I wanted to see how vulnerable we were. I started getting calls and emails that said, I put in my ADP login payroll information in that login box, it popped up. Is that a problem? I put in my network username and password in that login box. Did you keep that? Am I in trouble? So I can tell you that we were very vulnerable to that phishing attack. So since then, what I've done is I personally train every new employee that comes into our organization. I train them on the risks of being on Facebook, the risks of not necessarily trusting Google, the risks of some of the malware they can get from advertisements that are on Facebook. I counsel them on password use and constant password change. And it's funny, and all the training I do, the question I ask is, the password you use for Google right now, for your Gmail, is it the same as your network password? And invariably, I'll see 80% of my employees go, ooh. I'm like, do you know how bad that is? I audited a company before, went to the CEO, hacked his account, and I was able to get access to everything. Payroll, purchasing, everything, the whole mainframe through that one password. So what I do now is I train all new employees. It's cheap, as has been indicated, and I send out a weekly email information security news bulletin. And the feedback I'm getting now from employees is, I forwarded this to my wife and her company, because those guys are a bunch of boneheads. They do this all the time. And so I get positive feedback now that says, hey, I avoided this, and they're sending me stuff that I now can incorporate into my training of phishing examples they just received, right? Oh, you're getting a free refrigerator install from Home Depot. That was a fun one I just got a couple of days ago. The employee forwarded it to me and says, I would have clicked this had I not gotten your training. So it's very cheap. It's very cheap.
We used to track the emails that we would send out weekly to pay the security updates. What we found is people were forwarding them onto their families. They were forwarding them onto their churches. They were socializing security. And I mean, they will do it. If you give them a way to do it, they really will do it.
I tell you, Intermountain, in response to your question, training is a regulatory requirement. So we actually are required by law to train all of our employees. End of the training cycle just happened 2 days ago. We actually tracked that every employee goes through, signing documents. And at Intermountain, it becomes not just a regulatory requirement, we actually suspend people and send them home. If you don't take the training, you will receive for the year a not met, and you'll be sent home suspended for a period of time that's usually 2 or 3 days without pay. So it's a very important thing. I would tell you, in a security program, that's a critical part of, if you looked at that program, I'd start right there. I mean, you've got to get a risk inventory, we talked about that, but I'd put that right up top in terms of things you can do. It's fairly inexpensive, not too difficult to do. The kinds of things that we've described here in terms of spear phishing, I've done that many times. We catch people all the time. We're actually attacked 2 to 3 times a week with spear phishing attempts. Pretty quick to respond. We have a detection team, they catch that. You may be being hit pretty regularly too. We actually have a mailbox. We tell people, if you see these things, send them to us. We can block and watch, but we're seeing those regularly. But the other thing that I would tell you is that your people can identify, and we try to educate our people, they can identify risks you don't know about. So we try to educate them. They can send us information about things they have seen that we aren't aware of. And so that, I think that education that you're talking about would be a critical part of what you're trying to do.
I think it's important to establish a point of contact where people can go to if they receive a particular email. If they have a question, send it to abuse@companyname.com. I think it's also important in the aspect of training is oftentimes I like to get very technical in my training, which we need to get to that level, but I also have another individual in our organization who I run the training through, or multiple individuals, to make sure it's at their level and that it makes sense.
Everybody's doing it in-house, is that what I understand?
We do it in-house.
We do it in-house as well.
We have a catch of the day email that everybody can send things to. And then every quarter at our quarterly meetings, we give out an award for the best thing caught. And that's pretty amazing, some of the things that we do find. So I mean, those things are low cost and free, and they can raise awareness.
I think another thing is use examples of phishing emails that apply to your company. I mean, as a financial institution, LinkedIn, For example, find those phishing emails that are LinkedIn based, show your employees, hey, these are the links that are actually in that email. These are the attachments that are malicious.
Great question. We're kind of running up on the end of time. We got a couple of more questions. We got time for that, but I just want to throw it out back to the audience. Darren, that was a great question. Thank you. The dessert must be here. Okay. So one again, kind of a deep question before you guys want to chew on for a minute. A lot of people rely on, I think, Carl, you mentioned Gartner. There's other publications and things where you gather information from. But we're relying a lot on what we determine as industry experts to give us what we should be scared of coming forward. If you look back 5 years ago and said, what was I scared of 5 years ago, and did it come to fruition? I mean, and if it did or didn't, what are we scared of now? And how are we getting our information to go forward? Where can we turn to get reliable information, things that we're told are going to happen, did happen or didn't happen? Going forward, what do we want to do? I know that's a loaded question, but just how do we look back versus today and today versus forward?
I think one of the cool things that I've seen happen in states, and I was talking to a guy in Detroit about this, and you mentioned it, or in your bio it was mentioned, are like the state healthcare information exchanges for cyber attacks. Finding things that are relevant, germane to your vertical, that are the specific kinds of attacks that other people are seeing. I know there's been a lot of hesitation, a lot of time to share information on attacks with other companies, but really groups like this, actually finding ways to socialize with the people in your region, in your industries, to really understand what everybody else is going through and what they're seeing. Things like InfoGuard, fantastic program, FSISAC, the reporting areas where you can actually get these feeds back in to tell you what you need to be concerned about. I think the more you participate and reach out to understand what the real threats are versus those things that are the ones that the CEOs come and yell at you about because they read about it in a magazine, I think can really help you stay ahead in your security program.
I would agree. I think for me, it's really the networks that I've established with people. InfoGuard's been a great resource. It's fairly proactive, get a lot of great bulletins from them that are specific to my vertical. I also leverage SANS. Having gone through many of the SANS certification programs, I use the SANS website pretty extensively. Specifically, their security bulletin. They have daily kind of event that they track to and do forensic analysis on. Plus, being in a heavily regulated space, and having an emphasis on ISO 27001, I try to stay on top of what NIST is doing and some of the information I might get from those sources. But it's mostly about the people that I know. The proactive phone call or text that I'll get and say, hey, are you aware of this? That's probably the most beneficial.
For us, we monitor regularly threat feeds that are pretty common. You can participate in threat feeds that are available from your vendors, whoever those vendors are. We participate, we receive those live. They display in our security ops center. We watch and monitor those things, and those are pretty helpful. In addition, there are security specific for industry feeds that you can subscribe to and get data on. We are subscribing to a number of those, and I think in your industries you'll find, like we have, some things that are specific to what you're dealing with. So in healthcare, we participate in I participate in a monthly threat call that is sponsored by the FBI. There's one that's sponsored by Health and Human Services. So I sit and listen to the FBI, the AG, Health and Human Services talk about what they see is coming. Then we look at the real-time threat feeds that we receive from vendors and others, monitor those things. For healthcare, there's also a feed where we can contribute into a national repository and show what we're seeing and look and see what other healthcares are seeing. I think those are not uncommon, and I would tell you the reason I believe that you'll find it in your areas. Healthcare is a little bit slower to adopt these things. Budgets are leaner, tighter, and so for us to find some of these things has been hard. I've been able to see them for your areas more easily than I can for healthcare.
A difficult challenge also is when you receive these threat feeds, what do you do with them? You need to go back to evaluating your controls behind the risks, and can you incorporate those threats, those feeds into that technology?
All right, probably time for one more question. Yes,
Eric, you mentioned earlier at the beginning about cloud providers, talking about risk tolerance. Do you see the gradual maybe compliance to all of these issues? I know we're regulated by the FDIC, and I know they're very hesitant to let us go with cloud providers. But do you see eventually that these providers will be probably capable of even doing more than the regular organization that's really able and capable of providing?
I think it's probably going to go that way. I think it may start out as a niche where you actually are kind of offering a value-added cloud where you're doing maybe some data loss prevention inside of that cloud, or some discovery scanning of what's in that offered inside of it. What we're seeing right now is kind of a hybrid movement where, let's say I'm going to utilize the cloud, but I'm going to use technology inside like a DLP, or data loss prevention system, to ensure that the data that I don't want to go up to the cloud isn't going up there, to give me that assurance that I am keeping a really good control on those things that I want to keep very close to my chest. But I do see that as a goal. I think I have a sneaking suspicion, because of some things that have happened with some of the Google apps, that they are probably going to go that way at some point. I think the data telemetry and is probably going to be pushed, because at some point these cloud providers are going to have to participate in a large number of e-discovery requests, or any kind of discovery request, and they're going to have the tools necessary to help you do that at some point. So I think there's definitely an opportunity there. I haven't seen anybody from a cloud offering yet that's really offering these kinds of tools. Like I said earlier, I have seen an uptick in those that are willing to allow you to place forensic tools in their cloud. It's still not really widespread, but I'm seeing more of it, which is encouraging, because that way we maybe could do some internal vulnerability scanning of the cloud environment itself. I've actually done that with one of my cloud providers at another company. It was a bit of a coup. I'm surprised they let me do it, honestly. But I definitely see that it's going to go in that way, because otherwise there's going to be a limit to the amount of growth in the industry.
Thank you.
okay. We do have time for one more. Anybody want to jump in? Yes, sir. Name, please.
Ron Bird.
Ron Bird. Who are you with, Ron?
Jordan School.
Jordan School District.
We don't have any security risks there. We have 52,000 students.
No security risks. 52,000 students, trustworthy students, no security risks. All right, make up a question.
Okay. So I'm sitting here listening, and I've been eating instead of taking good notes. So my question is, would you be willing to share your methodology? Would you be willing to share some information? How do you do it where you're at, so that I don't have to go back to Jordan School District and recreate or try to remember exactly what you said? Is anybody recording this?
Yes, actually, this is a great question. And just so you know that I'm filming, wave the camera.
So you're going to provide that?
Anybody that wants it, we'll put it up.
It'll be in the cloud.
It'll be with a link that says Nigerian Prince wants to. That's right.
To your question and your specific instance, I was working with a company over in Australia that has 72,000 students. It's a large private national sized school system that has, education really brings a lot of challenges, because legally there's things you can't block, there's things that you're legally required to block. You have to protect their identities, etc. So I mean, I'd be happy to discuss your challenges and see if they align with what they're talking about and solutions.
There's also a cyber defense competition called US Cyber Patriot that you can get your middle schoolers and high schools involved with, and you could leverage them too if you could.
You can have your students hack it.
They're already doing it.
And remember, it's the cyber defense.
They're already programming defenses.
Maybe if you encourage them to do it, they'll stop.
Yeah.
That's right. Make it a grade requirement, it'll go away. All right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate it. It's very kind of you guys to show up. As I mentioned, if you don't want your information shared, let Jan know. She'll take you off the list. Otherwise, to Mr. Bird's request, you'll have the ability to commiserate with each other, find out if people do have policies, procedures, structures, methodologies, et cetera, that they want to let go as well. And I didn't do a good job of this, I apologize. If I can real quick, in the back over here we have Chris Hyatt from Network Consulting Services. We have Dave Lamson as well, Dave raised your hand, Patrick Frazier, Ryan Gaz, Brian Hodzik. Brian's our CTO, probably one of the more interesting characters on the planet, so if you get a chance, hit him up. But as well, we'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you very much. Can we get a round of applause for these guys? As a reward, you do get lunch, so stick around. We'll get you your orders and get everything taken care of. Other than that, thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. We're going to send out a survey. Please do respond to it. We want to improve this over time. Dave, did I forget anything? You look like you want to say something. No? Okay. All right. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, I need to text you stuff. I know, oh, yeah.
All right. So, Joe, are you scared? You've lived through a few of these. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to yell at that.
People are just.
You guys met Sean, Robin, did you meet Joe? So Leon works for and didn't his team decide and I wish he would have said that. His team, he teaches we so he has kids that he's training, young, should I say, young adults. Patriots? I'll make sure you guys are what you learn how to do is 2 types of training. So I have an urban story. I don't know if it's perhaps no confidence in the kids from the segment. They have guest wireless learning and they have teachers. The kids would know exactly so the kids started wearing t-shirts with the fact that the password for all day.